guess we can start now. Right, so I'm Menaka Audugama, and I'm a senior lecturer attached to the Department of Agribusiness Management of Faculty of Agriculture. And so my my PhD is in agriculture and food economics. So this is also my area of teaching and research. Um, right, so this module, Principles of Economics, might be a new module, sort of a new subject for most of you, because I know that most of you might be coming from science backgrounds, but it's not a difficult subject. So I'll try and do it at a pace that you can understand. But if you do have questions, do let me know. You can talk or you can send me your clarifications, questions in the chat box. Um, right, so let's get on with the lecture. So let me know if you have any questions before we start. However, I'm extremely sorry that we had to miss a lecture last week. I will record all the lectures and upload them on LMS, but there's a bit of a problem because we missed one lecture and I thought of doing 2 more sessions during the course of the week. But Pramod tells me that you have your exam next week. So I have changed the plan a little bit. So let me show you what I have done. I hope you all have access to LMS.
Yes, Miss.
Okay. Right, so take a moment and quickly see if you have access to this module. What I have done is I have uploaded the Principles of Economics module, which you may have with you already. And there are a set of activities, right, which you can practice within the week. And one has answers, so you can go through the answers as well. And then these, and then the home assignment is there, which you have to submit on the day of the exam. Right? The quiz will be uploaded within the week, and the recordings are there, right? So there are recordings which are for the entire book, chapters 1 to 3, 4, 5 to 6, and the last one, macroeconomic variables. And then there's also a recap that I have done earlier, so you can go through all that. So what I thought was I won't be able to cover the entire book today, so I'll sort of go through the basics today, and then you can go through the recordings after that. Go through the recap as well, the recording. And we can meet again on Monday or Tuesday so we can go through what you can expect for the exam, right? Because otherwise you won't have enough time to study. So the recordings are based on your lectures. I usually use slides, but I thought it would be easier for you if I go through the module, the book that you have with you. Right, so I guess that's clear. And the quiz will be uploaded. Yeah, that's about it. And okay, so you have this with you. Principles of Economics. Yeah, the Department of Agribusiness Management is offering a course for the faculty. And the aims are there. You have to have a basic knowledge of what we mean by economics when you start recording. Right? So you should be able to explain the basic economic concepts, terminology, and then the relationship between supply, demand, prices, and be able to understand and apply what you've learned into understanding practical problems that you see or observe in the economy. Right. So the list of content today we will be looking at an introduction to economics, and then we will look at the demand side, the supply side, the theory of the firm, cost theory, market equilibrium, different types of markets under the theory of price, and then macroeconomic variables. Right. Right. So chapter one. For chapter one, I will use a set of slides, but it's based on the module. Right, so I'm going to start recording, but if you have any questions, let me know it. Like I said, you can talk, switch on your mics and talk, otherwise you can send me messages in the chat box. You know that the medium of English instruction is English. But you can ask questions in any language except, English or Sinhala. Unfortunately, I can't speak Tamil, but let me know if you have any questions in Sinhala or English. But you know that you have to write the exam in English, and you've done exams so far, and you know what the pattern is. So you're familiar with the exam. So what I will do, like I said, is I will sort of cover at least 2 chapters today, and the rest of the chapters are on LMS with recordings. So go through the slide, go through the module with the recording. It's all there, right? It covers the entire book. The recordings cover the entire book. And like I said, there's a recap which talks about what you have to focus more for the exam, right? What I expect from you at the exam. So go through that as well. And then on Monday or Tuesday, I'll give you a slot probably around 7:30 or 8 in the evening. And then we can meet up online and discuss, again, like how you can write the paper and what I expect. Right. So let's get back to the lecture then.
Recording in progress.
So in the introduction to economics, we will be looking at some basic terminology that you will come across throughout the book and during the course of this module, right? So the first question is, what do we mean by the term economics? So how do we define the term economics? Right? So economics is pretty much in the limelight these days because we are struggling to come out of an economic crisis. We have felt and experienced the impacts of crisis, economic crisis, different economic shocks. So I think most of us have some basic idea as to what is an economy, what is economics, right? So we live in an economy, right? We are economic units. And what do we mean by the term economics? So if you have not done economics before, you might think of different answers, right? Some might think that it deals with money, finance, policies, and price. We study prices, inflation, unemployment. So yes, all that is there in economics. So basically, very simply, what we do or what we study in economics is how we make choices. Now, if you take yourself as an individual, right? Or if you take yourself as an individual. Now, today is a Saturday, and then you had to make a choice, right? You could have worked, most of you work, so you could have worked somewhere, or you could have done some other work, right? Or you could have gone on a trip because it's a long weekend. All the other option was for you to study economics. So today you chose to study economics when you had several other options, right? So why did you study economics? Again, you have different reasons to study. Pursue this module because you have to sit for an exam, you have to pass the exam, you have to get a good grade, and so many different reasons would have led you to study economics today. But you had to make a choice, right? You had to make a choice between working, doing a job today, or going somewhere else for leisure, or studying economics. So we, on a daily basis, we make choices. If you go to the supermarket, we have to make a choice as to what we are going to buy, how much we are going to buy, right? How many units, how many kilograms we are going to buy, what brand we are going to purchase. So we have to make a choice on a daily basis as individuals, so households. At the same time, firms make decisions on what they are going to produce, how much they are going to sell, how they are going to price. So firms make decisions. If you take the economy or the government rather, they have to make choices as to what they're going to, in terms of what they're going to export, import, foreign currency, foreign exchange, how fiscal policies, policy implementation, what else, unemployment, how they're going to manage price fluctuations or inflation. So you can see in an economy, we all make choices. So in economics, we study how we make choices, or rather how we make the right choice. But there is a definition. Right? So these are some reference material if you are interested in reading. If you are doing want to do higher studies, these are books recommended everywhere in the world for economics. So what do we mean by the term economics? Now, most of you come from pure science background, including myself, right? We do science, we do physics, biology and chemistry for our A levels, and then so we are, we know what pure science is, right? How we characterize the science. So we say that economics is also science. That's why economics is taught in all agriculture faculties in the world, and we specialize in what we call as agricultural economics, right? So today we are learning the principles of economics, but if you specialize, right, there are different sub-disciplines in economics that agriculturists specialize, like environmental economics or agricultural economics. But what do we mean by this term economics? It says economics is a scientific study of how humans make decisions, right? Or it's a scientific study of human decision-making behavior with respect to satisfying insatiable wants produced using scarce resources. So it's a science, it's a social science, studies how we as humans make decisions to satisfy our wants, right, in the face of scarce resources. Right, so let's go a little bit deeper into the definition. So these terms, in my computer exam, I might ask you to explain this, why economics is a scientific study. So it's a science, it's a social science because we deal with society, how humans, how people make decisions on a daily basis. Okay? It's a science because it analyzes economic behavior using scientific methods. Right? So if you characterize a science, we learn in our A levels what characterizes a science, right? Why is biology a science? Why is physics a science? Right? For example, it's based on the evidence of observable phenomena. So similarly, economics is also based on evidence of observable phenomena. Right? We make decisions based on things that we can observe. Right? And also it's replicable and objective. For example, if somebody says, okay, the inflation rate of Sri Lanka or the prices of goods and services have been increasing at 5% per month over the last year. So this is a claim, right? This is something we can see. If somebody claims that, then we should be able to collect data or find data from secondary data. It could be from reports or by collecting data using a questionnaire. You collect data and then you should be able to use a scientific method to do it over and over and get the same result, right? Just like in any other science. So it's replicable and it's objective, right? And then we can use the findings to strengthen or falsify. So you collect data, you do the analysis using a scientific method, and then it should show you whether the inflation rate has actually been increasing at 5% each month. Okay? So, and the last point is that it should help you to enable or predict. Right? So using economic models, we make predictions, we forecast, right? We can say what would happen if the government imposes a tax on, let's say, potato imports or tariff on potato imports, how that would affect the potato production next year, right? How production of paddy is going to change next year. If government introduces a subsidy to paddy farmers, how that's going to change the production within the next 2 years and in the next season. So that can be predicted using economic models. So there are theories, economic theories. We collect data and then we can analyze to see whether these are true or not. Right. So here's a definition in singular. Right. So I've included it because some of you asked me what the definitions in singular, but you won't be using singular for the exam, but this should give you some idea as to how we define the economics as a science. Right. So I said that in economics we use objective statements. Right. We don't use normative statements usually. But when you study economics further, that there are cases where we use normative statements in some sub-disciplines, but generally we try to make our statements, our inferences, objective based on what we see, what we observe, right? And what we infer from economic scientific analysis. Now here's an example. If you look at this, look at this example. Okay, it says the rate of inflation changes time to time. So what do we mean by this term objective? Is that objective or positive statements are statements based on facts and figures, right? Normative statements are usually based on judgments. Now, the statement, the rate of inflation changes time to time, is a normative statement, right? It's a judgment. Even if you don't study, even if you haven't studied economics, by looking at what's going on in the economy, we can say that the rate of inflation changes time to time. But if you're an economist, or if you have studied economics, we try and be more objective. For example, here's a more objective statement. It says the rate of inflation in Sri Lanka. Now, if you look at this statement, as in economics, we should be able to, like I said, because it's a science, we should be able to get data, do the analysis, because this is just a claim, right? We use scientific methods, statistical and economic models to test this claim to check whether this is correct or not, right? You find evidence to falsify or strengthen or to prove the statement. Now, if you look at this statement, if I'm an economist and I want to check whether this is true or not, how do I collect data for this? It says rate of inflation changes time to time, but we don't know where, right? Which country, whether it's in Sri Lanka or in India or globally, time to time, within which period, right? So this is just a judgment. It's not based on scientific facts or figures. So it's a normative statement. So if you were to write this or reword this to be more objective, this is how it would sound. The rate of inflation in Sri Lanka over the last 6 months has been 8%. So it tells you where in Sri Lanka over the last 6 months, right? Over the last 6 months. So you can collect data for the last 6 months to see whether this is really 8% or not. So how do we collect data? From where do you collect data? It could be primary data, but in cases like this, we go for secondary data, right? You can use central bank reports or reports from the Census and Statistics Department or the Food and Agriculture Organization or the World Bank or has data on inflation, on prices, country-wise. So you collect secondary data, you do the analysis to see whether this is really true or not. Right? So I hope you can understand the difference between objective and normative statements. So positive and objective are very similar, meaning that they're based on scientific facts. Normative statements, on the other hand, are based on mere judgments. Right. So in economics, we talk about different economic entities. Right? We talk about usually consumers and producers. Those are the two key actors in the economy. Right, so let's come back to this in a minute. So when you take economics as a discipline, right, now we understood the definition of economics. There are two key subdisciplines in economics, microeconomics and macroeconomics. Okay? Now, if you take the economy as a whole, what are the entities that you can see? What entities can you see in an economy? Right? අපි බටහිර economic ගත්තොත් අපිට මොනවාද දකින්න පුළුවන් economic entities, economic units. So first in an economy, we see the smallest economic unit we say is the household. Right? It's a household. Household. And we live in households. We consume, we are consumers. We live in a household. So, so in economy, the smallest economic entity is the household. And then there's a bigger entity, relatively larger, the firms. So the firms produce goods and services. We consume them. We pay for the goods and services. We work for firms, be it the private sector or the government sector. We work for firms and then we get paid for what we do. So there's an interaction there. But these are the two smallest entities in an economy. So in microeconomics, we study the microeconomics. We study how these two entities make decisions. For example, if you take households, consumers live in households. Consumers live in households. And in firms, you find producers. Consumers and producers. So we study how consumers and producers, so how households and firms make decisions. Now, for example, if you take a household, we have to make decisions, right? We have to make decisions on how much to purchase, how we are going to consume, how we are going to spend, right? Whether we are going to spend for education, whether we are going to spend for food, how much, right? Savings. So all that happens in a household. So that is called consumer behavior, and that comes under microeconomics. Again, then the other entity is producer behavior or firms. And so firms make decisions on how much they produce, what they're going to produce. Are they going to produce food? They're going to produce textile. They're going to produce vehicles, machinery. So, or services, right? Are they going to have to do some service sector involvement, investments? So all that comes under producer behavior. So that is studied. These two entities are studied under microeconomics. So that's why it's called micro. This talks about the two smaller entities in the economy, firms and households. In other words, consumers and producer behavior. So that's micro. So what do we mean by macro? Now in an economy, other than these two entities, there are other economic entities or actors, isn't there? So what governs these two? You have the government, right? You have the government. So government intervenes. Ideally, the government is not there to do business, but then they are there to protect the consumers and the producers, right? So if you look at the big picture or from a bird's eye view, the government deals with the overall economic entity. Now, whatever is produced by the firms, they come into the economy and the market. And then we talk about aggregate production, aggregate demand, consumption. Then we talk about unemployment, employment, right? We talk about imports and exports. We talk about foreign exchange, we talk about deficits, tariffs, and all that under macroeconomics. the involvement of the government, policy making, right? So all that is studied under macroeconomics. So you can understand the two broad disciplines, microeconomics and macroeconomics. So there are sub-disciplines. These are the two broad disciplines, but there are other sub-disciplines which you may have heard of, right? So once you study economics in general, if you're interested, you can specialize. So most agriculturists specialize in agricultural economics. Right? So we specialize in agri-economics. How can we run plantations better? How can we run farms better? Agribusinesses better? How do we allocate resources when it comes to agriculture sector? Water. So there are environmental economists. Then there are financial economics, labor economics, and energy economics, ecological economics. Likewise, there are sub-disciplines, but all these sub-disciplines use the same principles that we are going to study in this module, but then you study these sectors, application of these principles in these sectors in depth if you specialize in this area. Right? So you know that the agriculture faculty of our university, we have a specialized department called agribusinesses and agricultural economics. Right? So you have agricultural economics, where we look at agricultural economics, agricultural marketing, all that is taught under the broader price analysis, how prices work in the agriculture sector. So all this is studied under agricultural economics. Right. So that aside, now we are going to go into the two broad disciplines. We will spend more time on microeconomics, and then we will touch briefly on macro because it's a whole different, another discipline, sub-discipline, which takes, a lot of time. So in this module, because it's an undergraduate first module, we will focus more on microeconomics, and then I will give you some basic understanding of macroeconomics. Right. So what do we do? Okay, the first thing that we're going to look at is economic questions. In any economy in the world will have to answer these three questions. What to produce, how to produce, and for whom to produce. Right? If you go back to this definition, it says it's a scientific study. Now we learned why it's a science, why it's a social science, and in economics, we study how we satisfy our wants in the face of scarce resources. So this is the big problem, isn't it? Resources are scarce. Now, if you look at Sri Lanka or any other country, we know natural resources are scarce. We know financial resources are scarce. There's a limit, there's a limitation. That's a barrier for production. So when the resources are scarce, we have to make decisions, right? So why, when you go to the supermarket, why do we decide on what to buy, how much to buy? The කොච්චරක් ගන්නවද මොනවද ගන්න කියන එක decide කරන්නේ අපේ budget එකකින්, right? Because the finance or the amount of money that we have in our pocket is limited, it's scarce. So therefore we have to choose, we have to decide, we have to make a choice among the available options, right? ඕන තරම් සල්ලි තිබ්බනම් ඕන තරම් බජට් එක නෙවෙයි නම් අපිට කැමති ප්‍රමාණයක් කැමති දෙයක් ගන්න පුළුවන්. එහෙම නෑ. අපි හැමෝම බජට් එකකින්. It depends on your income, it depends on various other factors, but still, we all on a budget, so we have to make choices, right? So similarly, the economy is also limited by resources, scarce resources when it comes to natural resources, right? Water, land, fish, natural resources, minerals, right? There's we talk about renewable resources, non-renewable resources. All these resources are scarce in an economy. What else is scarce? You can think of any resource, and they are all scarce. So therefore, we have to decide, we have to address the questions of what to produce. Economic බලන්න අපි මොනවද produce කරන්නේ? කොහොමද produce කරන්නේ? Labor use කරනවද? Machinery දැන් plantation එකක් ගත්තොත් mechanize කරනවද? Automate කරනවද? අපි labor use කරනවා. What are you going to produce? We're going to go for a monocrop or go for more than one enterprise. We're going to go for crops and livestock together. We're going to go for value addition. Again, what are the produce? For whom are you going to produce? How or when? Okay? How are we going to distribute? So basically in economics, we study how to produce, right? What to produce, for whom to produce, distribution, right? Especially in the agricultural sector, we know that there's a lot of post-harvest losses, and distribution is a key factor that we have to focus on, right? How do you produce efficiently? How do we make sure that it's available? And how do we distribute efficiently so that nobody is worse? How do we keep that margin, the price margin, within the certain range, right? So all that will be studied under economics, and also all that has to be looked into when you address these three key questions: what, how, and for whom. Right. Now, the biggest problem that we face now, if you take an economy or firm, economic, firm, all these firm and economy will have to answer this question, right? Firm, what to produce, how to produce, and for whom to produce, right? What are they going to produce? The textile, or is it any other commodity? They have to decide. They would want to produce more and more. Okay? But the problem is scarcity. Unlimited wants and needs, but limited resource. We know about needs, right? Basic needs can have needs in North India. Beverages, but what will in North India? We might need we might want to have coffee and tea and fruit juice and other types of drinks, and you name it, right? So scarcity. Because we have wants, you have to satisfy or cater to, we'll have to cater to these wants. So therefore, scarcity rises. So scarcity is the biggest problem that we face in an economy. So that's why economics is the asset discipline. In economics, we study how we can make better decisions in the face of scarcity, right? When scarcity is there, how do we make the right choice, right decisions? So because of scarcity, we have to make the choice. Scarcity, I've seen it, the choice, right? So this leads to what we call in economics as trade-off. Trade-off, right? So what do we mean by trade-off? Now, for example, let's say I go to the supermarket with 500 rupees in hand, right? Rupees 500. And I want to buy fresh milk. Or I want to buy food. I have two options, okay? Fresh milk and fruit juice. Now with 500, I know I can't buy both. So I will look at the different benefits and what my family wants, and then I will go for fresh milk. Right? Now with 500, if I cannot buy both, right, I will have to forego fruit juice. Right? Let's say I can't buy both. I have to forego fruit juice. Fruit juice ගන්න බැරි නම් මට afford කරන්න පුළුවන් මේ දෙකෙන් එකයි නම් there's a trade-off because I'm limited by this 500 by my budget. මට මෙන්න මේ fruit juice කියන option එක අතාරින්න ඕන. එහෙනම් අපි ඒකට කියනවා trade-off එකක් කියලා නේද? එක option එකකට යනකොට අනිත් option එක අතාරින්න වෙනවා. So similarly, not only individuals, firms වලටත් මේක මේ විදිහට impact එකක් වෙනවා. On what do we invest? What do we produce? Right? We can't produce everything in a firm. So you have to decide. When you decide or when you make a choice, you have to give up another. Economy will have to decide, right? අපි subsidies දෙන්නේ මොනවද? අපි produce කරන්නේ මොනවද? අපි import කරන්නේ මොනවද? right? එතන trade off එකක් තියෙනවා. Okay? So whenever you make අපි කියනවා නැති උපන වටිනාකම. නැති වෙන benefit එකේ වටිනාකම. නැත්නම් the value of the next best choice or the alternative or the benefit is called, it's a cost. It's an opportunity cost. It's an opportunity cost. Right, so the same theory applies for any economic entity, be it a firm or an economy. Now, for example, Sri Lanka has limited land for agriculture, right? Limited land for agriculture. So Sri Lanka, the economy, will have to decide how we are going to allocate this land as a resource, right? Make that the crops with another, crops where the the forests another, crops are in the plantations, the field crops, right? So you have to decide. හැබැයි හැම choice එකත් එක්කම අපිට නැති වෙන දෙයක් තියෙනවා. That benefit that you're going to lose is called the opportunity cost. It's the value of the next best choice. Okay? So let's say now I have a land. Say I have a land and I decide I might have to choose between whether I'm going to cultivate this land or whether I'm going to build a building and rent it out for, let's say, 10,000 rupees per month. So if you go with this option, then you're going to lose this option, and your option cost is 10,000. So it's the value of the next best alternative. So because we are looking at in economics, we deal with how we make decisions given in a limited resource or scarcity environment. Option cost is something we have to consider in our analysis. Now, you would have heard of cost-benefit analysis. Right? For example, if you build, let's say you build an airport, or the government wants to build an airport, or any other development project for that. So economists are usually asked to conduct cost-benefit analysis. මේ airport එකක් හදන්න ඉන්නවා. මේ development project එකේ තියෙන costs and benefits මොනවද? එතන අපි බලලා environmental costs, economic costs, social costs and benefits. So there we have to consider opportunity cost. But if you take an accountant will not consider an opportunity cost. Accounts are the opportunity cost. By economics, opportunity cost. The value of the next best choice will be considered as a cost in your calculations. Okay? So here are a few examples, which is also there in your book. And then we consider the four factors of production. In economics, we divide or we categorize all resources into four factors of production. All resources that you find in the economy around you, in the environment around you, are categorized under four factors of production: land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. Now, land, we know all natural resources, be it fish or trees or oil or minerals, water, all these resources come under land. Okay? And then you have, so we know land or natural resources are scarce. Okay? We know how scarce water is. We know how scarce oil is. Right? Alright. So these are all limited scarce resources. Labor, physical and intellectual labor. Now, Sri Lanka might have enough labor available for production, but if you don't have skilled labor, then that's going to be a barrier for development, right? So that's why, the government or any government would want to introduce new courses, vocational training to improve skills, right? So you are able to apply your skills better. And so that's why, we are going for like new reforms, right? So the world is changing, the demand is changing. So to cater to demand, cater the needs of development of the country and globally, we have to, you might know that universities, we revise the curriculum every 5 years, internal and external, all for all degrees and postgraduate, undergraduate, postgraduate degrees. So the governments will look into reforming, changing curriculum, the school curriculum. Look at how things in postgraduate education should be done. So vocational training should be done. How do you improve the skills of the workforce in Sri Lanka, upskill, reskill. So to have a better skilled workforce, otherwise labor, though it could be abundant, it can still be a limiting factor. Kochara labor tikwa, the skilled labor natta, it's going to be a limiting factor. So labor is another factor of production which is limited, scarce. Capital, different types of capital, be it financial capital, physical capital. Capital again is a factor of production. These are inputs needed for land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship are inputs for production. Okay? So therefore, they are called factors of production. And then the last one, or the fourth factor, is entrepreneurship, management. But the two are different. I'm sure you know that by now. So let's say an economy has all the above factors: land, labor, capital. But if you don't know, or if you don't know how to allocate those resources better, efficiently, how to make the right decision in the face of risk and uncertainty, then it's of no use. Right? So that's where entrepreneurship comes in. When you learn about entrepreneurship, when you learn about management, they are two different words, but there we learn how to make better decisions, right? How to allocate resources better and more efficiently. So factors of production, these four factors are essential for an economy. Okay? Or in other words, these are all the inputs categorized you need for production of goods and services. So these are the four factors of production. Using these factors in a firm, in an economy, we produce goods and services consumed by consumers. Okay? So goods and services both together are called, we call them commodities, commonly and generally. What are goods? Goods are tangible things that we can touch usually. Services are intangible, right? For example, service of a barber or a doctor or a care worker. So these are services, and you know what goods are. Right? So it could be a phone or food or other goods. Right. So depending on who owns these factors of production? In factors of production, when ownership of it on the carpenter, the Sahar. You can remember we discussed the three key economic questions. Okay, the economic questions. Who addresses these questions? The matter. Economic systems formula there. Okay. Mainly, we can talk about three economic systems, but there are other sub-economic systems that you might come across. And I will talk about three key economic systems. Right, so it's like a continent. We take the economic systems like continent. Okay? On one extreme, we have what we call as the command and control economic. Okay? Or the centrally planned economic. Command and control or centrally planned economic. On the other end, you have the market or capitalistic economy, and then there you have the mixed economy. Right? So in a command and control economy, we see the government or a central planning body decides that they own majority of the goods, the factors of production, land, and other resources are the majority of the resources are owned by the central planning body. We could see this in those in China and Cuba. So these economies will plan their production, their consumption. The central planning body will make decisions. So the consumers and the producers have very little choice in these types of economy. Okay? But on the other hand, you have the free market or the capitalist economies, where the majority is owned, the resources are owned by the private sector, the consumers demand different types of goods and services, producers produce different types of goods and services, and we can see different types of mobiles, brands, food, clothes. So, the consumers have a say, and the producers can cater to which. Right? So there's a lot of choice in these types of economies, markets in these types of economies. And in the middle, you have the mixed economy, where you have both in action. Like you have the government mainly there to protect the through, let's say, safety nets and all that. And then you have both the producers and the consumers, but the government also plays a significant role. Right, so I'm not going to go into detail, it's all there in your book. And then this might not be in your book, but I thought it would be interesting for you to know these two economists. One is Karl Marx, who was called Result of Communist Manifesto. During this time, there was a capitalistic economy where the employers, there were two classes, there was a class system, the employees, and the employees actually were treated not that good, like machines, and they were not paid well, they did not have a good life, good living standards. So Karl Marx came up with this manifesto, Communist Manifesto, to lead an economy from capitalist economies towards socialism and then communism, where everybody is better off. Right? Once this book came out, it gave rise to lots of revolutions, pressing the economics to move towards socialism and communism. And then there's Adam Smith, who we call as the father of economics, because a lot of the theories that we study today in this module and beyond are coined or introduced by Adam Smith, particularly under his book called Wealth of Nations. He talks about how countries can become rich. For example, he talks about laissez-faire, an invisible hand, where he says the government should stay out of business and let the private sector, the consumers and the producers, decide on how much to produce, how much to consume, the prices, and all that, and the government should stay out of business. It's called invisible hand. And he also talks about how countries can become rich through specialization, right? For example, he says that a country should not try to produce everything in the country. For example, if Sri Lanka has an edge over other countries when it comes to tea, we should specialize. If you specialize in tea production, we can, come up with better varieties, low cost production, and then you can compete in the market so that you don't have to produce everything. You capitalize or you specialize in tea, and then you export, and then you import the things that we have a higher opportunity cost. Opportunity cost එක අඩු ඒවා produce කරලා ඒවා surplus එකක් තියෙනවා නම් export කරලා opportunity cost එක වැඩි වෙනවා import කරන්න පුළුවන්. So that's comes under specialization, and then there is what we call as division of labor. So under his theories are the theories that we study when it comes to international economics, trade economics. We study a lot of his theories. Okay, okay, so that's the basic introduction. I think it's time for us to move to the core. So that's an introduction. I think it's all there in your book except for the economists. Right? Talk about opportunity cost, economic systems. And then we're going to look at chapter 2. Demand and supply. So let's
Recording stopped.
take a 2-minute break. And then see if you have any questions in the meantime. But in 2 minutes, we will go through deal with consumer behavior.
Recording in progress.
All right, so I think we discussed in the first few slides, then we looked at the different economic entities. So under microeconomics, we have looked at the 2 key entities, the household and the firms. When we live in households, or consumers live in households, and then from the farm, we have producers. So in a market, these are the 2 key entities that you see, the consumers and the producers. Okay? So consumers create the demand and producers. So now first we will look at consumer theory and then we will look at the producer theory. So let's start with consumer theory. So first we look at demand. What do we mean by demand? I mean, if you have the desire to buy something and if you can afford it, then it creates a demand. Right? You have the purchasing power, you have the desire to buy something, it creates a demand, be it a vehicle or a house or food or clothes or phones or whatever. Right? So, like I said, in economics, uh, we try and quantify things. Right? We may use what we said in the very first few slides. We said that economics is a science, right? So we use scientific methods, models to analyze demand or try and understand the nature of the demand, right? And for that, we want to first identify what we mean by the term quantity demanded, right? So let's say that you go to the supermarket and let's say you want to buy potatoes, right? You want to buy potatoes. Now take a moment and just think of what factors would influence the quantity that you demand. So what do we mean by quantity demanded? It's the amount of the commodity a consumer wishes to purchase, right? If we want to know 2 kilos, 500 or 0, right? So today I might go to the supermarket and say, no, I'm not going to buy any potatoes. Could be for different reasons. It could be that I don't need it, or it could be that the price is too high today, right? Could be different other reasons. It could be that, potatoes are not good for my health. Could be for different reasons. You decide on an amount to buy. Yeah, decide can not 1 kilogram or half a kilogram or so what factors? So that's a quantity demand, amount of a commodity that you wish to purchase. Okay? Now this amount or this quantity is determined by what we call as factors or determinants of demand. Factors or determinants demand. Right. So take a moment and list down factors that could influence the amount that you would purchase. If it's potatoes, let's say you go to the supermarket, and what factors or what determinants would determine the amount that you purchase. Okay? That's it. Take a moment and see if you can list the factors. So the first factor for me that would determine the amount that I buy potatoes could be price. I would look at the price. If price gone up or down, that would accordingly I might change the amount that I buy from or decide the amount that I buy. So factors are called determinants of demand. We can see the price of the product, price of its own product. It's its own price. We call it own price. They are the prices. Potatoes are potato prices. Price of other products, cross prices, substitutes. අපිට potatoes වෙනුවට purchase කරන්න පුළුවන් ඒ වගේ price එක. Right? Chicken price, mutton price, or fish price can influence related goods. Those are called cross prices. Now, let's say fresh milk and milk powder. The prices වැඩි වෙනකොට අඩු වෙනකොට fluctuate වෙනවා. ඒ quantities වලට impact එකක් තියෙන්න පුළුවන්. So prices of other products. Third factor, consumers' income. If my income increases, I might buy more potatoes tomorrow. Right? If I lose my job or if I don't have an income anymore, then I might decide to buy less. So income will determine the amount that we purchase. Taste and preferences. If I don't like potatoes, right, I might not buy or I might buy less. Amount will go down. So state of weather. Rain, drought, floods, for example, there's a higher demand for, let's say, ice cream on a very hot day, right? Higher demand for umbrellas on a rainy day. So state of weather, then acts of state, rules, regulations, advertising, taxes. So if the government imposes a tax, or we call a tariff, on imported potatoes, then that might raise the price of potatoes. That will affect the amount that I buy. If the government says, or if you get to know on media that the potatoes are contaminated, then, or they're expired, then people will buy less, or people might stop buying, right? So, acts of state or government intervention through taxes, tariffs, price ceilings, and any policy implication, policy tools could have an impact. Other than that, advertising, for example, if you see an advertisement saying, this milk powder is good for your health, we see a rise, an increase in the demand for certain goods. So that, or for that particular milk powder. So advertising, standards, right? If you get to know that a particular good is contaminated, then people stop buying or reduce their consumption. Now, during COVID, if you can remember, the people stopped fish consumption for some time. Right after the Express Pearl incident, people stopped or reduced their fish consumption because they got to know that fish, to some extent, were contaminated. Right? So those factors can have an impact on the demand in the market. Other than that, the last factor would be various sociological or social demographic factors, such as age. Right? With age, your demand varies with gender. Right? Females, there are enough and more studies on how gender affects purchase. Right? Level of education, your occupation. Right? If you are a very busy person, and then you might look, your demand for more convenience products or ready-to-eat meals might increase. But if you're more educated, you might look for healthy options, right? Low fat, low sugar, low carbs. So various sociological factors or socioeconomic, socio-demographic factors will influence your purchase or your quantity demanded. Right? So these are therefore called determinants of demand. Why? They determine your demand. Okay? So now, if you can remember, we discussed that in economics, we use scientific methods. Now, even if you don't study economics, without learning economics, we can say that, when the price increases, people buy less, right? When your income increases, people tend to buy more. If the government servants' income increases by a certain percentage, then we can expect an increase in purchase. Right? So, but as economists, we use scientific models to do this. So in economics, we use both statistical models, mathematical models to estimate these relationships, test economic theory. So we use scientific methods to analyze economic behavior, right, of human behavior in an economy. Right. So you have some idea of statistics and mathematics, right? You know what the function is. So, and there are customized packages, software to do this analysis as well, right? For example, to do efficiency analysis, to do demand analysis. The software, statistical tools, mathematical tools to analyze these relationships. Right. So what have I done here? I have written all these factors in the form of a mathematical equation, right? Because I want to specify the statistical model, right? So this might be new to you, but in economics, there's this discipline called econometrics, where we combine economic theory with statistics, and then we have come up, or the economics have come up with something called econometrics. Right? So that's just for your knowledge. So what do we do here in the demand function is that we have specified these variables, its own product, its own price, cost prices, income. और denote करना चाहिए ना letters से ना सामान्य आप income economics से लिया ना y use करना price p government intervention g. So age can give something age, gender, education. So these factors, I have written these as in the form of an equation or a function, right? Now this is a multivariate function. You would have studied this from mathematics or statistics. It's a multivariate function, meaning that these variables can vary together, right? So what you see on the left-hand side is equation or the function. It's a function. It's the quantity demanded, quantity purchased. If it's potatoes, quantity demanded of potatoes. Right? If it's sugar, quantity demanded of sugar. Tea, quantity demanded of tea. Now, because we're looking at potatoes, on the left-hand side, then you have one variable, which is the quantity demanded of potatoes. So if you collect data, first you will collect data for quantity demanded of potatoes. D stands for demand, Q is quantity. And then there's this letter F, function. Right? I'm sure you're familiar with this. Function means that these variables, now this variable, QD, is a dependent variable. If you can remember, it's a dependent variable. This variable depends on the independent variable. Independent variable. So dependent variables is a function of all these independent variables, Now you can collect data for the independent variable. Price of its own product, its own price. Price of potatoes. Okay? Price of other factors, like something that you can substitute the potatoes, other vegetables maybe, other types of any substitute for that matter. Right? Then you have Y, which is income. Then you have gender. Then you have government information. Then you have age. Then you can have if there's any tariff being posted or not. So you can collect all that data and then use the statistical software to estimate this relationship. Once you estimate the relationship, we can come into inferences or we can make decisions. For example, we can analyze what would happen if price of potatoes, whether that plant potatoes with potatoes, price. If the price of potatoes goes up by 5% in the value, quantitative change rate, the 2% on the way, right? You would expect the demand to go down. Right? Someone price of value that we expect from the price quantity evaluate. You can estimate that. That's the theory. Theory එකේ කියන එක ඇත්තටම වෙනවද කියන එක අපිට data collect කරලා බලන්න පුළුවන්. Or you can, for example, so what would happen if, let's say, the government increases the income of all government servants by 10%. 10% වැඩි වෙනවා. ඒක කොහොමද අපේ purchasing වලට බලපාන්නේ? demand එක අඩු වෙනවද වැඩි වෙනවද? Government එකකින් tariff එකක් imported potatoes are imposed through. How will that affect the demand? Right? With gender, age, education level, all that can come under this variable. Now, how do we collect data? For this type of an analysis, we can't go with primary data. You can also forecast. When we model it use කරලා අපිට forecast කරන්න පුළුවන් through in future what would happen to the demand of potatoes. So what do we do now? We collect data, right? You can go primary data, but better yet if you can go for secondary data. You can collect data from the central bank reports, statistics department reports, or World Bank reports. Food and Agriculture Organization has the data on a database for different types of vegetables, for potatoes, fish, and all that for country-wise data. So you can use any of these reliable sources and you do the estimation. Right? If you're going to trade-related demand data, then venomous statistical data, economic databases there. Right? Such as UN Common Trade, එතකොට අපිට බලන්න පුළුවන් tariff එකක් impose කරොත් කොයි විතර demand එක වෙනස් වෙලා තියෙනවද? Over time, කවුද already විශ්සේ. ඉතින් ඒ data අරගෙන අපිට ඒක බලන්න පුළුවන්. So you can analyze the demand if you once you collect data and write it as a demand function. So that's the importance of estimating a demand function. Right. Since this is the first principles of economics, we are going to go into a little bit more detail on this demand function. So now what we're going to do is we are going to take just one dependent variable and just one independent variable to see how independent variables affect the demand. Okay, we're going to take the quantity demanded and the price. Quantity demanded and the price. And we are going to assume that all these variables are fixed or given. In economics, we call that ceteris paribus, meaning that all other factors are constant or fixed. But we know that's not true in an economy, right? Price එක potatoes වල demand එක නම් අපි බලන්න. Potato demand, potato price. ඒත් එකම income එක වෙනස් වෙනවා මිනිස්සුන්ගේ related goods වෙනස් වෙන්න පුළුවන්, government motivation වෙනස් වෙන්න පුළුවන්, taste and preferences වෙනස් වෙන්න පුළුවන්, but just because we are learning the first principles of economics, for our convenience, we assume that all these factors are fixed or constant. ඒවා අපි fixed කියලා assume කරගෙන අපි බලමු price එහාගෙන price එක එහාගෙන quantity demanded for potatoes as a function of price of potatoes. So what do we do? Now, if you look at this table, have a look at this table and see if you can figure out the relationship between price and quantity. So you can see when price increases, it affects the quantity demanded. Right? When price is zero, if let's say potatoes are given free, then people demand or consumers demand 40 units. When price increases to 5, you'll see the quantity reduces. 10 goes down to 8 units. So if it goes all the way up to 35 rupees per kilo, then the quantity goes down to 4. If I plot this on a curve with price on this axis and quantity on this axis, right? So when the price is 35 rupees, quantity is 4. When the price is 0, quantity is how much? 4. Okay? Now, if I plot curve, you can see a downward sloping, negatively slope curve. Okay? We call this the demand function. So demand function, or the demand curve rather, demand curve is a relationship between price and quantity, price and quantity, and this curve is a negatively slope, right? Why? We know that when price increases, report quantity decreases. So Samanu essential good. Usually, when price increases or normal good, yeah, price divided by the quantity. Have I even known if it's right? Some are luxury goods, like, or some food and beverages such as wine, right? Or luxury cars or shoes. So, our price is very limited. Quantity is very limited. Flower there, price is very limited. Quantity very limited. Positive relationship. But in this module, in this course, we will only look at these normal goods where when price increases, quantity decreases, right? මේ මොඩියුල් එකේ කතා කරන්නේ මෙන්න මේ price quantity relationship වල negative වෙන goods ගැන විතරයි. right? Price එක වැඩි වෙනකොට quantity එක වැඩි වෙනවා. Right. What else? So why does this happen? Why does this happen? Why do we demand less when price increases? So to understand that, economists came up with this theory called utility theory. Right? Utility theory. So let's have the utility theory. Look at the utility theory. So there are two types of utilities that we can talk about. Or rather, there are, okay, what's utility? It's the level of satisfaction. Now, why do we purchase potatoes? Because it gives us a satisfaction. Why do we purchase a car, a phone, any good or service? Because it gives us satisfaction. Again, the level. Sally given like a purchase කරන්න. නම් යම්කිසි satisfaction එකක් ලැබෙනවා. මෙන්න මේ satisfaction, the level of satisfaction එකට තමයි අපි in economics කියනවා අපේ utility. Utility. Right? There are two schools of thought. Utility, there are two types, and also, there are two types of utility. One is cardinal utility, and the other is called ordinal utility. Right? For our convenience, it's quantifying utility. What do we mean by cardinal utility? Now, utility is the level of satisfaction. Another important thing is we say in economics, now this is consumer behavior, right? The consumer behavior consumers are the objective with our utility maximize namely satisfaction maximize අපි food purchase කරන්නේ beverages purchase කරන්නේ ඕනම product එකක් purchase කරන්න අපේ utility එක maximize කරගන්න satisfaction level එක maximize කරගන්න. So now, if that's the case, we should be able to, as economists, we should be able to quantify this. Now, to do that, we learn about cardinal utility and ordinal utility. So just go through the slide quickly. Then cardinal utility, what we do is we assign a number called utils. We measure utility using this unit called utils. Now, if you want to measure a distance or weight, we know the standard units we use, right? But for utility, there's no such unit, but we have to quantify this. Therefore, economists have come up with this measure called utils, right? It's a subject, it's relative. Now, for example, this car, let's say, pays 500,000 and it gives you the same amount of utils. Or I could ask you, yeah, I'm going to give you an ice cream, right? I give you the first ice cream and I ask you to rank it on a scale of 1 to 10. And you would give it 10 newtons. That's the amount of satisfaction that you get. If come on half ice cream, second ice cream. So you would say, no, I don't get the same level of satisfaction now. I get about 5. Okay? I give you the third ice cream, but again, I know I'm not the same because I've already had 2 ice creams, right? Or you've had 2 ice creams, and then you could say, now my utility is about 2 units, right? So, 2 liters. But liters is used to measure the level of utility. It's a relative measure. That's one way of measuring utility, or we could use ordinal utility where you order your preferences. Right? Tea or coffee, you measure the preferences. For one person, tea would be number 1. For the other person, second preference is coffee. For another person, coffee would be 1, tea would be 2. So likewise, the consumer preferences vary, and accordingly, you can order and measure the level of utility. Right. So again, we are not going into details on ordinal utility, but we will look at a numerical example using cardinal utility. Right. So just have a look at this. Okay. I'm going to just make it easy for you. Now, so in the first column, you have the number of glasses of water, and in the second column, you have the total utility. Now just ignore the third column for the time being and focus on the first column and the second column, the number of the water glasses and the total utility. Now let's say on a hot day, I give you the first glass of water and then I ask you or I measure your level of utility, right? 15. Give you the second glass, 25. Likewise, I measure or I record your utility level, your satisfaction when I, at each class, I will show your utility. So you can see when you get the first 0 water, 0 utility, you get the first class, you're very thirsty, and then you get 15 utils of satisfaction. How many glasses level? Making up to 15 utils of satisfaction level. Second class, right? Consecutive now. You have the first, you drink the first one, I give you the second class. Second class again, first class utility but in total utility, what you actually do is you sum it up. It's the cumulative utility. 15 plus second level total utility 25. Third class total utility 31. Right? So let's just go through the first column and the second column and see if you can plot this relationship on a curve. I'm going to plot the total utility against the number of water glasses, right? We start at 1, 0, 1, 2, like this, we go all the way to 10. What would happen to total utility? You can see that total utility gradually increases, comes to a maximum, and then decreases, right? Your total utility increases. Once you drink the 8th glass, your utility maximizes to 41.45. That's the maximum utility. And then thereafter, you're given the 9th glass. Now, what with the glass of level, it becomes a disutility, right? We know that even in water can give you a disutility, dissatisfaction, poison, right? It could be toxic. So then, 8th gate maximum level, the vada what api akamating one. It's a disutility now. So you can see your total utility reduced. So that's the total utility. You look at the third column, which is the marginal utility. Now, this term marginal is very important in economics, right? As we go along, you will see we talk about marginal utility, we talk about marginal product, marginal cost, marginal revenue. Marginality is an important concept in economics. We look at, should we spend 1 extra rupee on production, on purchase? Right? Should we produce an extra unit? Will there be any gains from it? Right? Should we consume an extra unit? Right? Should we purchase an extra unit? So we talk about an extra unit, additional unit, and that's called marginal. Right? So here we're talking about marginal unit. consume, a additional satisfaction of level, right? Extra or additional satisfaction is actually marginal utility. Marginal satisfaction or marginal utility. If you go, if you start at zero class and 0 utility, and then you have the first class. When you have the first class, you get 15 units of utility, and of course, that therefore leads to 15 additional units. So from 0 to 15, 0 in the plastic but a very good marginal utility, extra, additional, or in other words, marginal utility. It came to the higher. Very good level utility, the higher. You get the third class, and additional utility is 6. So what does that mean? Here is 15. You see, as you drink an additional glass each time, your additional marginal utility, your marginal utility gradually decreases. After the very good level utility, the satisfaction again, now it's true, isn't it? Half a glass of the look satisfaction. If the glass of the either adu it to eat a padade. So, very good consecutive glass consumed in marginal satisfaction. So, if I plot that on the same graph, you will see that it gradually decreases. This is your marginal utility. And you will see that when total utility is at its maximum point, the marginal utility is 0. And make a mathematics product curve at the top. Right. So what do we mean by this term marginal utility? Marginal utility is actually the additional utility. If I draw this graph separately, you have total utility and the water classes. That's the total utility. Total utility. एक glass of vadipura, if you have a word, vadipura level, total vadipura level satisfaction. So that, what do we call that in mathematics? It's the slope. Marginal utility total utility slope. Total utility is slope become marginal utility. Water glasses, the cooking radical, total utility, section of the radical. That's the slope, right? So therefore, the slope of the total utility is actually the marginal utility function. Now, you might remember that, if you can't recall, just go back and refresh, go through your mathematics notes that whenever the curve is at its maximum or minimum, when its minimum or maximum point indicator slope with a zero now minimum point indicator marginal indicator zero right? Total indicator maximum. Now all in the function, be it utility or this is a cost again, production again, supply again. Now, what will allow the function of a maximum point or minimum point the average slope with a zero. So this is very important for our next calculation. Right, so here's the definition of total utility and marginal utility. So marginal utility then is the change with delta and put a triangle here change in total utility to change in quantity. Right? Change in quantity. So we will have the water in the water glasses. Change in total utility. Okay, quantity the value of what should be more utility the value. Okay. So yeah, total utility increases as you consume more and more same commodity. Commodity again and the value of it. Take a slope with the time, change in quantity to change in total utility. It's a marginal difference. It is not really. You can see that total utility maximum and a quantity. Marginal utility is zero. Right. And then we talk about what we call as real optimization marginal utility. This is another important definition in economics. And what does it say? Simply what it says is when you consume successive units of one commodity, successive units if you are taking consume the value for a utility, the marginal utility, and then the right? Returns, return again, and value consume become a product of successive units. Right? That's this might come for the exam. I might ask you to write the law of diminishing marginal utility. Right now, the question is, okay, where will a consume? What a point to get the consume value? Will the consumer have 8 classes, 9 classes, 5 classes? How many classes? We say that the consumer will consume. Okay, let's take that. Let's draw that. To be the graph that we just see with the water glass, the metal quantity. We know that the probability increases, comes to a maximum, and then decreases. Right? That's its probability. So we say we can look at, or we can think of two options or two instances. One is when the product is given free. If water is free, if water is given free, we say the consumer will reach out to the maximum point, right? Reach the maximum utility. Second instance is when the good is priced. We know water is not free, it's priced. Price about the first political amount, where should be consumed. Now, that was given, that point is found using this equation, where it says the marginal utility of x equals at the maximum satisfaction point indicated, marginal utility of the first Oh no, let's say the water is, you don't drink any water, right? If you don't drink any water, W is 0. And the meter is 0. And level hour total utility is 12. Right? It's 12 because these two terms, 0. And then that's, so before you start drinking water, your total utility is 12. Then calculate the total utility when she consumes these number for these many glasses. How do you do that? When we number देखो आप 4 5 glasses consume करने utility को बना कर लो. What do we do? When you consume 2 glasses, I'm making a substitute for 2 glasses. So utility with 12 plus 3. Then देखो consume करो. W is 2. Minus current 2 is 5. W is 2 to the power 2. Right. So take a minute and see if you can do the calculation. So to go back to your module, it's all there, right? So if you consume 2 glasses or 2 cups, and 6 glasses and so on, we have the numbers here, the answers are given, how much, what you get if you consume 2 glasses. So it's all there, you can do the calculation. Right, then the third question is, derive an expression for marginal utility, right? So that's important. If you go back to this, how do you derive an equation for marginal utility? Now we know that marginal utility is the slope of the total utility. How do you derive the slope of the function? You differentiate it once. මට ගැති ඉමැක්සද කරන slope එක ගන්න අපි එකපාරක් මේක differentiate කරන්න ඕනේ. Can you, now we are going to differentiate du by dw. We differentiate करना with respect to water. Now 12 we cannot differentiate because there's no W term. And a W term say now we try to differentiate term. How do you differentiate this? We assume that number is a copy and right? You don't write 1. Okay? You multiply that by 3. Right? So 3W. Then you take away 1 from this. Current aparitano, we can 0. Okay? Multiply this by 0.25 by 2, you get 0.5 W, making it final with the one. Okay? 0.5 W. But this is not stable because we cannot write 0 as an exponent. So W to the power 0 is 1. we end up with multiply. W to the power 0 is 1. So 3 times 1 is 3 minus 0.5. W. Don't write 1 as an exponent. Right? So the margin in the integrated function is 3 minus 0.5 W. Right? So this is mathematics. You've done this before for maths. So you can take a moment and let me know if you want me to explain this again. So if everyone's okay with this, then we will go to the next question. And then you can calculate the marginality. A function of you can calculate or you can substitute these values for W. W will not substitute for. You can find the marginal utility values. So the answers are there. Yeah, the answers are there. And we then go through that. Right. Then the fifth question is based on your estimates, how many cups of water will this consumer consume if water is free of charge? Right? Water free, Kushara is right. Now, if you can remember, we discussed this equation. Before that, we know that if water is free, the consumer will reach the maximum satisfaction. At this maximum satisfaction, the marginal utility is 0. See, right? So if you can make marginal utility 0, and you write the mathematical function, then you solve for W. And the method of the W is all that. Good. So if you can do that. Here, W would be 6, isn't it? Make it a circle, but W is 6. So that is the number of water glasses that you consume to maximize your satisfaction, okay? Totally give the maximum minimum quantity of the water glass higher quality. Okay? That if water is free. Feel and question over there. Assume if the price of water is 0.5 per unit. 125 minutes is going to per unit. 0.5. Now, how many water glasses do you drink? How do you find that? Then operator 1 minimum function. If mu equals P. Price of water. Marginal utility being 3 minus 0.5 here equals price of water up to 0.5. Now can you solve for W? Then here. 5, isn't it? Now it's 5. So you can see, if you plot this on the graph, it's 5 units. So if water is free, you reach the maximum. You can consume 6 glasses, but the minute it's priced, you will see that you have to consume less and less, right? Price, dividing by consumption. Again, another. So if you plot that on a graph, price if I water and the table, the price it's in a free. Price free now water 6 glasses. Price of 5 water. Price of 0.5 water 5 glasses. If you have a 100 graph apart, and I plot that on a curve, price and water quantity. Price equals 0 now, water quantity is 6. Price is 0.5, water quantity is 5. Now, if I plot a graph connecting these points, what do we see? It's a relationship between price and quantity, isn't it? And we call this a demand curve. Now you should be able to see that demand curve is derived by the utility curve. Demand curve is derived by the utility curve. Why do you? Because when you consume successive units of the same good, their utility decreases. Again, quantity to value, we tend to pay less. And so that's why the demand curve is a negatively sloped function. Right? So if at home you try and work on this equation, the answers are there. Right? And then you do it. Right in here, there's a bit of a mistake. And until isn't it? This should be 17. You check that. But other than all the answers are correct. Yeah. Those answers fine. And so you can work on that. And then we talk about indifference curve, which is now we just discussed utility when you consume one thing. Then you consider utility when you consume two goods. Right? It's called the indifference curve. So for the exam, I might ask you to draw the indifference curve and the equilibrium. And then we talk about changes to the demand. Demand function make factors and demand curve over the rest. You will see that its own price, own price but demand curve But all other factors, price, other goods, income, all those are called price shifters, substitutes, right? And complements, all those will shift the demand curve. The demand curve so that I will ask you to plot the change due to demand change in demand due to demand shifting. And with that, we come to the market demand curve. The market demand curve. Like if you take individual demands, all of us have different demands. Now for rupees, let's say, if 1 kilo of potatoes is 200 rupees, I might buy 1 kilo. You might buy 2 kilos. Another person might buy 3 kilos. Another person might not buy anything at all, any potatoes at all. The price is pricing 200, 2 kilos. Or can it 3 kilos? Or can it 5? Or can it 0? Even what we demand, but at aggregate level, market ticket we consider an average demand. So that's called the market demand curve. Okay? Because I will discuss elasticity of demand. As economists, we want to know how responsive is demand to factors. Price at 5% which percentage demand income of 10% which percentage elasticity demand elasticity elastic stretchy which responsive which stretchy the demand factors So that is where here you can calculate a value for demand elasticity. A value to දිහා බලලා අපිට කියන්න පුළුවන් මොන වගේ චුට් එකක්ද කියලා. For example, most normal goods or essential goods rather will be inelastic. يعني price එක 1% වලින් වැඩි වුණොත් demand එක එච්චර percentage එක වැඩි වෙන්නේ නැහැ. Because it's essential like rice or potatoes or dal or bread. ඒවා අත්‍යවශ්‍ය essential things. Therefore, they are relatively inelastic. Actually, stretchy in half price. The medicine. Now, let's say somebody is diabetic. Like a cholesterol. They have continuously run on. They are inelastic. Which is the price of the you would have to buy fuel in Sri Lanka. You don't have any other alternative. Petrol, diesel, value, no. But a basic electric vehicle, alternative, and the barrier have to purchase. So they are essential. But non-essential, the substitutes good are clearly fresh milk for the price again in the then you can opt for substitute. The confection that is biscuit cooking up at the price of the you can stop buying or you can go for substitute. It may be the elastic. You can responsive price to give a such a stretchy and a response. They're elastic. You will get the value with her between 1 and infinity. So how do you calculate the value? You use this formula. To use this formula, change in quantity with change in price divided by initial price, price divided by initial quantity, and then you can find the value. Okay, it's all there in the discussion. Okay, so that will cover the demand curve. Then we go to the supply side, right? The other entity in the market, the consumer side, or entity producers. Once you understand demand, supply is very similar. It's just that it's the opposite. Right? For example, we know that price and quantity relationship for demand is negative. But for supply, it's positive. Why? Because suppliers like to supply more when price increases. Price is the price when consumers, but producers like it when price increases. So the higher the price, the more they will supply to the market. Right? Price is C now. Eat vada where supply quantity unit price this year. So they will supply more to the market. That's all. It's very similar to the demand. Supply subtitles. It's just the opposite, right? So supply and demand will determine the price. May the cake of it equilibrium price for demand and supply. Demand is negatively sloped. Supply is positively sloped. Where these two meet will give us the equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. Okay? And then this module talks about how demand supply curve change and equilibrium. When I said before. And then you talk about the theory of the firm, right? The production function. Now, this is important. Production function talks about the input-output relationship. Let's say something like T. Now, for T, quantity or T yield dependent on inputs. Okay? Fertilizer, water, quantum material, materials. In relationship to production function. This is important why your home assignment is also based on this. But it talks about total product, average product, marginal product. These terms are very similar to what we discussed on the utility. Right? But we're looking at production now, not consumption, but production. Right? So based on this theory, you are given a home assignment, which is very similar to this example. Right? Minimum example. Like you have to do this at home, and then you do that. The home assignment is very similar. It's exact same thing, but the numbers are different. based on this production function, you can do the home assignment. Right? Then you talk about the cost theory, production possibility frontier, and then you have a little bit of the theory of price, different types of markets, and macroeconomics. Macroeconomics, you won't get many questions, just some basic questions, which I will talk about when we do the recap, inflation and all that. So don't worry too much about macro, but micro is important. You will have to focus more on the macroeconomics component.
Recording stopped.
Right. So like I said, because you have the exam on 17, I'm not going to take much time discussing the entire book, but like I said, I have uploaded recordings for each chapter. Now, what I want you to do is, I want you to go through the chapters and the recordings together, right? Do the examples. We're booking it in examples with my exam, but the numbers, of course, will be different. So go through that. And there's a set of activities, MCQs for you with answers. Go through that. And once you do that and you're ready, on Wednesday, we can have a recap session. So recap upload we will have another recap session on Wednesday to discuss the paper. But before that, you have to go through the module and the recordings because it's all there. Right? Pramod, are you there?
Yes, madam.
Okay.
Yes,
So
madam.
because if I spend more time going through the book, you won't have much time to study. So I think it would be better if you go through the recordings and the book together. But if you want me to do another lecture, I can do it. But I think it's better if you go through the recordings uploaded. So, you can work on the book at the same time. While you listen to the recording, you can do the workings on the book itself. And then we can do another recap on Wednesday evening, like around 7:30 to 9:30, where I will tell you what you can expect for the exam. And we can do a model paper.
Okay, madam.
Okay, madam. Thank you.
Okay, right. Thank you. But Pramod, let me know. I mean, either of you can just call me if you want another lecture. But I think this is the best way to go forward because we have limited time. So we will meet again on Wednesday. And tomorrow, Sunday's class, I will do the same thing for the Sunday group. But on Wednesday, we will do a recap. But please go through the recordings before that. Okay? Right. So I will stop here. Recordings are up there. If you can't find them, Pramod, just give me a ring. But it's all up there. Okay. Thank you then. I will stop here. I'll see you again on Wednesday.
Okay, madam. Thank you very much.
Okay, madam. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Recording in progress.
Thank you, madam. Thank you, ma'am.
Bye.
Recording.